Developing right now on Morning News Now, a dangerous deluge across California. This morning, millions of people bracing for another day of downpours from a powerful winter storm. We have team coverage as we track the conditions, the alerts, and we'll let you know when the West Coast could expect some relief. Also this morning, defiance from former President Donald Trump as his legal team prepares to appeal that $355 million civil fraud ruling in New York.
The case is a complete and total sham. It's a sham case. This is merely an election interference ploy by a crazed lunatic attorney general.
We'll have the latest as the presidential frontrunner crosses from the campaign trail to the courtroom. Plus, an alarming link between an essential B vitamin and heart disease. The new warning from researchers and what doctors want you to know. And finally, inflation bites. That's right. Even the tooth fairy is feeling the sting of high inflation these days. We'll drill down on why kids are finding more money under their pillows.
The numbers astounded me.
I know.
I'm pretty sure I got a quarter when I was young. So
I think it was like $1, but I agree with you that I can't believe what we're seeing
Major
now.
inflation. All right. Good to have you with us this morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to get started with the latest winter storm dumping more rain on an already soaked California. Flood watches continue up and down the California coast this morning with more heavy showers expected today.
The storm has turned roads to rivers, leaving some drivers stranded, forcing dramatic water rescues. Landslides and mudslides have damaged homes and blocked off roads, and there's a possibility of more land giving way as the rain continues to fall. On California's central coast, the Santa Barbara airport remains closed after storms washed out the area. As much as 10 inches of rain fell, leaving the runways covered with water.
NBC News meteorologist Angie Lassman will tell us how long the storm is expected to stick around. We'll get with her in just a moment. But first, we begin with NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz. She's in Los Angeles with the latest on conditions there. Good morning, Liz.
Hey, Joe and Savannah, good morning to you. It's raining down on us here in L.A. right now. And even as the worst of this storm starts to move out, we're still seeing the damage from this heavy rain we've gotten. For perspective, 75% of LA's annual average rainfall has happened just this month in February so far. I am outside a road closure for the famed Mulholland Drive here in LA. A part of it blocked off indefinitely now because of a landslide. The infrastructure across the state right now just in dire conditions in parts of it because of how saturated the soil is. We're seeing massive downed trees, fallen power lines, dangerous driving conditions, and people attempting to drive through rushing waters, getting stuck from Sacramento to Santa Barbara. There's been swift water rescues. I witnessed one yesterday in Santa Barbara. Also near Santa Barbara, a pretty sad, stunning image there at the Refugio State Beach. These massive, iconic, beautiful palm trees have collapsed into the ocean. That's because, again, the soil's so saturated, the beach is eroding. It's a combination of those things and just so symbolic of the issues we're dealing with here. Now, 35 million people remain under flood watches right now across the state. There's high wind advisories, high surf advisories. And again, even as the conditions start to ease up here, the threat of more landslides, issues like here at Mulholland Drive, more mudslides is very real in the coming days across the state. Joe and Savannah.
All right, Liz, thank you so much.
Let's get more on the weather that is headed your way.
Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us now with the forecast. Angie, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. Liz gave you lots of details on exactly how that situation has been unfolding. And unfortunately, as she mentioned, we've got more to deal with here when it comes to wet weather over the next day or so. Here's the deal right now with your radar. You can see plenty of heavy rain working into the early morning hours for folks in L.A., stretching down to San Diego. That's kind of the bullseye of where we're going to see the greatest chances of some flash flooding through the day. But we've got these flood alerts up and down California, from Northern California, San Francisco, Monterey, slow down through Santa Barbara, and even as far south as San Diego. We're dealing with the flood alerts that are in effect right now and likely lasting through tomorrow. But I mentioned that bullseye area. It's going to be Southern California that we see with a moderate risk of seeing the flash flooding. The rainfall rates are going to be once again pretty good. We're talking an inch per hour. So that, of course, on these already saturated grounds is going to be problematic. especially in Southern California, but the risk goes up and down the coast as well with that rain through the day today. Here's how it plays out. We've got plenty of moisture to tap into, so those rounds of heavy rain are going to continue through your Tuesday. We'll see some additional snowfall, but it's really going to be the rain with the flood risk that concerns us most across the state of California today. By tomorrow, much of that kicks out to the east, and we're instead dealing with the heavy snow working across parts of the Great Basin and the Rockies. We'll pick up some additional snowfall there, and we'll still, unfortunately, see some of those scattered showers lingering across portions of California. Between today and tomorrow, really through your midweek, another inch to 3 inches possible. This is why we're so concerned about folks in Southern California, specifically LA County, stretching down to Oceanside. Another couple of inches on grounds that have already received so much rain over really the season could be problematic. So the landslides, the mudslides, the washed out roads, all on the table here as we go through the day today. We do have the winter alerts in effect with that additional snow. You can see they stretch across much of those western ranges, and we're talking at some of the highest elevations, maybe a foot to a foot and a half. Otherwise, we'll see the snow starting to wrap up here as we get later into our work week, guys. But unfortunately, the threat of flooding will continue for folks out west today.
All right, Angie, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Now to the busy slate of legal battles facing Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump.
That's right. This week in New York, his legal team is expected to appeal the $355 million ruling in his civil fraud case. And then preparations for his criminal hush money trial in Manhattan, which is set to start on March 25th, get underway. Meanwhile, in Florida, Trump lawyers are planning to file motions to dismiss the classified documents case against their client this week. For more on Trump's legal fights, we are joined by NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Danny, as always, thanks for joining us. So a lot going on. You're going to help us kind of 3 questions, 3 different topics this morning. So thanks for being here. Let's start with the potential appeal here in this massive $355 million civil fraud ruling. First, I want to play a little bit of something the former president said, and we'll talk.
It's a sham case. There were no victims, no defaults, no damages, no complaints, no nothing. There was nothing.
This idea of no victims, is that really what an appeal could hinge on, and what does that look like?
It's the best of a series of long shot arguments when you're on appeal. And the argument basically is that the statute as applied to Donald Trump, there were no victims in this case in the sense that Deutsche Bank, for example, was a supposed victim that lost out on interest that it could have charged Trump on loans. But they essentially testified that not only did they not really see themselves as victims, they went back to Trump for more business, and they never actually lost out on money. And it is true, at least historically, that this statute has only really been used or largely used against companies that have victims, that swindle people out of actual money. And, of course, the state put on evidence that they did lose money in the form of those interest payments. So, I mean, look, when you're on appeal, you're grasping at straws. That may be the strongest argument out of a bunch of otherwise unappetizing ones.
Let's talk about the hush money case. It is going to be the first time a former president has had a criminal trial. We've seen civil trials with the former president. This one's criminal. Remind us what the differences are, what we're going to see here when this starts, perhaps on March 25th.
Maybe the biggest difference is that in criminal trials, the defendant has to be there. They have to be there for everything. Now, in these pretrial motions that we've seen in the criminal cases, the defendant doesn't always need to be there if it's conferences, status conferences, things like that. But when we're talking criminal trial, the defendant's got to be there. They usually have to sign a subpoena every time they appear in court, so they come back the next time. So that's going to be one major difference. And, of course, Donald Trump's liberty is at stake, sort of. In New York, we're talking about a Class E nonviolent felony. So is he likely to face prison time if convicted? Maybe theoretically, but I wouldn't expect him to.
Let's talk now about Florida. So Thursday's the deadline for motions. This is, again, the classified documents case. Trump is arguing that this should be dismissed. His team is saying that because of presidential immunity. What do you make of that argument, especially given that we've heard a lot about that? Do you think that there could be success there?
What do I make of it? There's been so much made of it already. There have been already several opinions at the district court level in D.C. and then at the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and now even in certiorari requests, or I should be more precise, stay requests to the Supreme Court. It's the most briefed issue in the history of issues. So I think it's going to be a lot of the same if they raise immunity. Look for, in terms of a different new argument here, is going to be the Presidential Records Act. You know, we often say that no person is above the law. Well, the defense is going to argue If the name of the law is the Presidential Records Act, well, the law kind of is treating one person differently. And it's not the Game and Wildlife Commissioner. It's the president. So they may have an argument there, although a lot of legal scholars will say, no, that's not going to protect him either.
All right. No offense to Game and Wildlife Commissioner.
No, it's fine.
Yeah,
nothing wrong
with
that.
Okay.
Thanks, Danny. Well, a new ruling by Alabama's Supreme Court could have far-reaching effects for in vitro fertilization treatments. The state's high court ruled Friday that fertilized, unimplanted embryos are children under Alabama's law. It comes after a group of patients filed wrongful death suits after another patient allegedly destroyed their frozen embryos by dropping them. Experts say the ruling leaves questions for IVF clinics, which could be held liable for discarding extra embryos. The case will now go back to the circuit court for more proceedings.
During the course of the war in Ukraine, we've seen a lot of conflict taking place around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That's Europe's largest nuclear plant. The fighting there has sparked fears that the plant may be on the brink of disaster. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel takes a look at just how dangerous the situation is at the Russian-controlled facility.
It's midnight on March 4th, 2022. CCTV cameras capture Russian troops as they attack Europe's biggest nuclear power plant near the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia.
It should be night.
Pietro Kotin, the CEO of Ukraine's nuclear power company, watched the attack from Kyiv.
This is just a terrifying video, watching fire spread and an attack at an active nuclear facility.
Right. And the units with nuclear materials right here.
The Ukrainians broadcast warnings, telling Russian troops to stop shelling at the risk of a nuclear disaster. The warnings went unheeded. Russian troops occupied the plant and the territory around it. Ukrainian forces held on to the far bank of the Dnieper River, leaving the nuclear power station right on the front line. 2 years on, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has inspectors at the plant, is sounding the alarm.
You're responsible for nuclear security all around the world.
Yes.
Is this the most dangerous nuclear facility on the planet right now?
It's the most dangerous situation that we have. It's my job not to, panic, but at the same time, I have to tell the truth of what is happening.
Nuclear experts point to three main dangers. First, a military strike on the plant, either accidental or deliberate. Second, a power cut. The plant's 6 uranium reactors require electricity for cooling, but Ukrainian officials say 3 of the 4 power lines are damaged, and the 4th is faulty. There have already been 8 blackouts, as recently as December.
When you have a blackout, the cooling function of the reactors is lost, and you could have a meltdown.
And finally, it's understaffed. Ukrainians say the Russians have been abusing employees. 11,000 people worked at the plant before. Only 4,000 work there now. Irina Kokot is responsible for radiation detection for the Ukrainian government. Her office predicts how, if there was a meltdown, a cloud of radioactive particles would spread across much of Ukraine and neighboring countries.
This is Istanbul, right here.
Yes.
The city of Istanbul.
Yeah, this Istanbul.
Contaminated the entire city of Istanbul on the Black Sea. It's a catastrophe, a total catastrophe.
She says the fallout would last up to 100 years.
A nuclear disaster here would be felt around the world. Tens of thousands of people would either be killed or have their health impacted, and large parts of Ukraine and beyond will be left uninhabitable. Richard Engel, NBC News in Eastern Ukraine.
Well, the United Nations Security Council is expected to vote today on an Arab-backed resolution demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. According to the Associated Press, which obtained a final draft, the resolution calls for Israel and Hamas to comply with international law, rejects the forced displacement of Palestinian civilians, and demands the immediate and unconditional release of all the hostages. But the U.S. is expected to veto that resolution and put forth a proposal of its own. For more, we are joined by NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter in Jerusalem. Molly, good morning. So first, what can you tell us about this U.S. proposal?
Savannah, that's right. So the U.S. is set to propose a rival resolution that also calls for a ceasefire but uses different language. It says a temporary ceasefire as opposed to the Algerian-backed resolution, which calls for an immediate ceasefire. The U.S. resolution, according to the Associated Press, also calls for the release of all hostages and calls for the lifting of all restrictions on the delivery of humanitarian aid. Savannah, as you say, the Algerian and Arab-backed resolution will get a vote later this morning. We are expecting at the UN Security Council.
Molly, let's now talk more about the situation on the ground. So yesterday, we discussed the fact that the World Health Organization said the hospital in southern Gaza's largest city was no longer functional. This comes after Israeli raids at that facility. Now we are actually seeing some video from inside the hospital. Tell us about this.
That's exactly right. So the World Health Organization has been trying to get teams to the Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis for the last couple of days. Well, the last 2 days, they have managed to get a team inside, and I think we actually have this video. Take a listen to one of the doctors who was on one of those rescue missions, and I'll tell you about it on the back end.
We were shocked what we actually saw in Nasser Medical Complex. There's waste everywhere. Electricity was not working. Parts of the hospital are damaged, and some severely damaged. The central drugstore, which was the drugstore, actually part of Nasser Medical Complex, which delivered drugs and medical supplies to the whole of south of Gaza, destroyed. Unfortunately, with a lot of the supplies as well from WHO and partners.
For the last 2 days, Savannah, WHO has been able to get teams and evacuate or transfer, I should say, 32 critical patients in ambulances. We've seen very dramatic video of these doctors kind of in full protective gear with radios, working overnight in very serious, very dangerous conditions to get those 32 patients to field hospitals in southern Rafah. Savannah.
Molly, also UNICEF out with a new report. They are warning about a soaring number of child deaths due to malnutrition in Gaza. One executive specifically says the Strip is, quote, poised to witness an explosion in preventable child deaths. Tell us more about this report's findings.
Savannah, that's exactly right. And we've been talking about the dire warnings from WFP, from UNICEF, from big international aid organizations about the acute food shortages across the Strip. Well, the most vulnerable population is in the north, and then the most vulnerable population of those estimated 300,000 people living in the north are children. So what this new report says is that 15.6%, or 1 in 6 children under the age of 2, are acutely malnourished. Of these, Savannah, UNICEF in this report says 3% suffer from what they call severe wasting. That is the most life-threatening form of malnutrition, and they say this puts these children at the highest risk for death if aid does not start getting to the people who need it most, Savannah.
All right, Molly Hunter from Jerusalem for us. Thank you so much.
Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, feeling the burnout, what researchers are saying about who's most at risk for burnout and what you can do to beat it.
Up first, after the break, a high-profile hearing now underway in London as WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange fights extradition to the U.S. We'll be right back. Welcome back. An international search is underway for an American woman who went missing in Madrid. Ana Maria Nesevich was in the middle of a separation from her husband when she moved late last year from Florida to Spain. Nesevich has been missing for nearly 3 weeks now, and her loved ones are searching for answers. NBC News correspondent Stephen Romo spoke with the family's spokesperson in Spain. Here's the latest on the case.
Someone has done something to her, and I'm trying to understand who it could be and why.
Friends and family of 40-year-old Ana Maria Nesevich are desperate to know where she is. The Florida resident was last seen on February 2nd at an apartment she was renting in Madrid.
She is just so caring. She is so sweet. She is just so soft. She is funny. She is smart. She's adventurous.
Nesevich moved to Spain in December amid a difficult separation from her husband, David, according to her friend, Sana Ramo, who says she texted Nesevich the day she was last seen, but didn't hear back. But the next day, she got what she called strange messages saying, "I met someone wonderful. He has a summer house about 2 hours from Madrid. I will spend a few days there. Signal is spotty." Adding, "He approached me on the street. Amazing connection."
I tried to respond saying that I got worried about her, like it didn't sound safe, like what is she talking about, like this makes no sense. And my messages didn't go through.
A las 8:30 de la noche estaba en su casa.
Joaquin Emils Bonet is president of an entirely volunteer-run missing persons organization in Spain and acting as a spokesperson for the family. He says that at 8:30 p.m. on February 2nd, Nesevich spoke on the phone with a friend for about an hour and didn't have plans to go out. At about 1 a.m., a neighbor across the street saw lights on in her apartment. Emils Bonet says that at some point on February 2nd, a neighbor saw that the security cameras in her building had been painted black.
Por lo tanto,
Emils Bonet warns not to jump to conclusions, saying, "We don't know the time the cameras were painted, and we also don't know if it was just a random act of vandalism." But friends of Nesevich are quick to bring up the couple's contentious separation, specifically the joint financial interests. NBC News found 3 corporations registered under the couple's names in Florida: EOX Technology Solutions Incorporated, Registered Corporate Agents LLC, and EOX Capital LLC. Nesevich's brother telling the Fort Lauderdale police her husband David is, quote, not happy about the amount of money that needs to be split. Ken Padowitz, a defense attorney hired by David Nesevich, telling us the divorce proceedings hadn't officially started and that his client is cooperating with authorities.
We obviously hope, like everyone else, that she's found and she's okay. But David has nothing to do with this. He was in another country at the time that she disappeared in Spain.
Just to be clear, he's been in Serbia that entire span of time since before February?
Correct. He's been in Serbia prior to his wife ever gone missing in Spain.
Our thanks to Stephen Roma for that report. The missing persons organization mentioned earlier in Stephen's piece also tells NBC News that the story is all over the media in Spain, but getting information from police in Madrid has been very difficult.
An appeal hearing is underway in London in what could be a last-ditch attempt by WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to block his extradition to the United States. The 52-year-old was indicted in the U.S. on multiple spy charges following the bombshell publication of classified U.S. military and diplomatic records back in 2010 and 2011. If convicted, he could face life in prison. Assange's supporters, seen gathering outside the court, say the case is politically motivated and that he is being persecuted for exposing alleged U.S. war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. NBC News international correspondent Josh Letterman's outside the High Court in London. So, Josh, bring us up to speed on how exactly we got here and what this appeal hearing is all about.
Well, Joe, as you can see, it is a very colorful situation here outside of the Royal Courts of Justice, with many of those Assange supporters showing up to protest his potential extradition. Assange himself had hoped to be in court today, but his legal team says he's actually too ill to be here. But this legal saga dates back more than a decade that Assange has been fighting extradition, including those 7 years that he spent holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy here in London. 2 years ago, the British government signed the order to actually extradite him to the U.S. to face those espionage charges. And so this hearing is really the final attempt by Assange to try to secure an appeal that could prevent him from being extradited to face justice in the U.S.
So, Josh, what's the main argument from Assange and his legal team against this extradition?
Well, Assange's legal team argues, look, he's not a spy. He's a journalist and a whistleblower who exposed crimes by the U.S. government. But they're also making another argument that it would actually violate his human rights to extradite him to the U.S. because of the potential that he might not physically make it if he were imprisoned in the U.S. Take a listen to what his wife, Stella Assange, had to say.
His health is in decline. Mentally and physically, his life is at risk. Every single day he stays in prison. And if he is extradited, he will die. Julian will be put in a hole. If he is extradited, be put in a hole so far and deep in the ground that I don't think I'll ever see him again.
Now, the U.S. has made assurances to the British government that they won't put Assange in maximum security prison in the U.S., that his human rights will be respected, Joe, but ultimately it will be up to a judge to decide whether to consider that appeal.
Josh, if Assange does lose this appeal, what happens next? How quickly could he actually be in America?
potentially within days or even a matter of weeks at the most, although there is a slight possibility, Joe, that a European court could intervene, saying that it would violate his human rights to extradite him to the U.S. But there are questions about whether or not that court could even act fast enough to stop the extradition, given that U.S. Marshals are pretty much ready to get on a plane to come here to London to bring Assange back to the U.S. if the U.S. is successful in getting this extradition.
All right. Josh Letterman. Josh, thank you so much. More international headlines now. The Kremlin speaking out against allegations made by the wife of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who just died while in prison.
Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome with that and more. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, guys. That's right. Yulia Navalnaya said that the widow, of course, of Alexei Navalny, said that Navalny's mother and his team were denied access to his body. Now, in a video statement that Navalnaya released on Monday, as she lived in exile, accused Russian authorities of hiding his body while waiting for traces of Novichok to disappear. Now, she was referring to a poison allegedly used by Russian security services in at least one previous assassination attempt. Now, the spokesperson for the Kremlin called Navalnaya's accusation unfounded and said that since she became a widow literally days earlier, they will leave it without a comment. In her video, Navalnaya also vowed to continue her husband's investigative work on corruption in Russia and on Vladimir Putin's alleged abuse of power. Let's now go to South Korea, where hundreds of junior or trainee doctors walked out in protests, causing many cancellations of surgeries and other medical treatments at hospitals across the country. Now, according to the health ministry there, more than 1,600 of them left their work sites, and more than half of a total of 1,300 junior doctors submitted their resignations. Now, they're protesting against a recent government plan to raise medical school admissions by 2,000 from next year. The government says it's urgent to have more doctors, but doctors say that's too many and fear it will trigger fierce competition and even lower salaries. And let's end this tour of the world in Cape Town in South Africa, where residents on Monday woke up to a foul stench that blanketed parts of the city. After a brief investigation, local authorities found the sewage smell came from a ship docked in the harbor carrying 19,000 live cattle heading from Brazil to Iraq. And the National Council of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals sent a veterinarian on board the ship to assess the welfare of the animals and said, quote, "This smell is indicative of the awful conditions the animals endure, having already spent 2.5 weeks on board with a buildup of feces and ammonia." Well, the ship is set to sail soon, but that's a bit too late because residents of Cape Town have already raised a stink about it, guys.
All right, Claudio, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Coming up, a warning from researchers about a vitamin commonly found in many foods that could be causing problems for your heart. What doctors want you to know.
And noise complaint. If you're bothered by sounds like loud chewing, it could be more than just a pet peeve. We're going to explain in our weekly check-in that's coming up next on Morning News Now.
We're back now with new research that suggests high levels of an essential B vitamin could potentially raise the risk of heart disease.
A new study finds too much niacin in your diet could lead to larger health issues. The vitamin is found in many foods like meat, fish, nuts, and fortified cereals and breads. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, good to have you with us. So first of all, what exactly is niacin? And according to this study, what's the possible risk of having too much of it?
Yeah, Joe, Savannah, niacin is actually a very essential B vitamin. It's B3, technically. There are other B complex vitamins, and it helps to convert food to energy. All sounds like a good thing, but only when it's in the right amounts. What the studies found is that there are incredible amounts of vitamin B3 or niacin that people are taking, largely through that last category you mentioned, Joe, the enriched and fortified breads and cereals. Those are high concentrations, as well as adding on a multivitamin where you could ingest 10 to 40 to 100 times the recommended daily amounts. Wow. That kind of high level of ingestion is leading to a breakdown of a product that is believed to raise inflammation and could be a link, I say could be a link to coronary artery disease, heart attacks, and strokes. So vitamin B3 essential, too much can be a bad thing.
Wow. And in fact, the study says about 1 in 4 Americans have higher than the recommended level here, which sounds like a ton. I mean, what exactly is considered an unhealthy amount? And what do you make of the fact that many Americans have this and probably have no idea?
Yeah, I'll be honest, this study is kind of shedding light on a whole new area that myself as a physician and other nutritionists were all talking about it, because we've been recommending these fortified cereals for a long time because people weren't getting it in some of the natural areas of their diet. So a recommended daily amount on average for a non-pregnant adult is about 15 milligrams of niacin units. What we're seeing in these studies are people getting about 40 to 100 and in some cases 1,000 milligrams. So you can see those numbers stack up pretty aggressively, and symptoms of toxicity can be all over the map, Savannah. They can look like low blood pressure, weakness. So if there's something that you're worried about because you're taking a multivitamin, look at the label. If it looks like it's a much higher amount than that daily recommended diet amount, have a conversation with a nutritionist or your doctor.
Could we see some changes to dietary recommendations in the wake of this information?
Yeah, I think we will. Look, for a long time, Joe, we had niacin in place as a recommended thing that we added to cereals and breads because people weren't getting enough of it. And we thought that it could be helpful. Before we had drugs to lower cholesterol, we recommended and prescribed niacin. So we thought all in all, it was a net positive. These new studies and many more that will come will likely change the recommendations for what we tell manufacturers to fortify and how we tell people to eat their food and in what quantities they should be getting this niacin.
Wow. All right, Dr. Patel, thanks for explaining this one to us. We appreciate it.
Really good info. Thank you. Well, sticking with news about heart health, Black Americans are 30% more likely than white Americans to die of heart disease. That's according to data from the Department of Health and Human Services. Here's the thing, though. When Black Americans go for an exam, the odds that their doctor is Black or from the same community are low. Now, the American College of Cardiology is looking for ways to change that. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar has this story.
How are you doing? Good.
Dr. Mary Branch has spent a decade learning one of the most challenging specialties in medicine. Hours in the hospital and clinic to become a cardiologist. And she's in a rare group, female Black cardiologists.
Cardiology is not only challenging from a learning perspective, it's just physically very, very hard. You're dealing with life and death scenarios on a consistent basis.
The specialty can be hard for anyone, but for Branch, it goes past just medicine. She wants to be there for her community. A recent study shows that just 3% of all cardiologists in the U.S. are African American.
It's pretty abysmal. When I talk about the numbers of hypertension, obesity, the importance of establishing relationships, how many people we need to make those changes, that's scary.
When patients see someone that looks like them, there is often an established trust and connection.
We share a culture with these folks. They don't have to explain a lot of things about their culture, where they come from.
African Americans are 30% more likely to die from heart disease than white Americans. Nikita Oxner knows this firsthand. Her brother died from heart disease caused by high blood pressure. And she's seen Dr. Branch for more than a year, once she learned of her heart murmur through a sleep study.
Talking to a Black cardiologist just kind of calmed my fears, because I'm talking to someone who knows about the health issues within my community, right, who's very experienced and also very calming.
Oxner had a small battery-powered device called an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, or ICD, placed into her chest. Before the operation, she was afraid, but trusted her doctor.
When it came to getting this ICD, she called it a little hospital or little emergency room in your chest.
Now with the ICD in place, she's getting back to how life was before.
She's guided me through this entire process, and now I'm on the other side of it.
Now, medical groups say the next step is to see more stories like Nikita's.
Is the American College of Cardiology starting any initiatives to address this?
We actually have a program called the Young Scholars Program.
The program starts in high school, spanning through college to help recruit more Black students and minorities into cardiology.
It gives them a very nice sort of supportive feeling that there are resources out there to kind of make it to the next step.
Becoming a cardiologist, like Dr. Branch.
It was something that was implanted in my heart. Every day you have impacted somebody's life and extended their life in some way. That is just profound.
Our thanks to Dr. Natalie Asa for that report. The American College of Cardiology Young Scholars Programs accepts about 200 students each year based on academic and personal achievements. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Let's turn to mental health now in our weekly check-in, starting with some new ways to spot when you're at risk of burnout at work.
Plus, if you are feeling lonely, we've got a simple change you could try this year that could have a big impact. Here to help break it all down is Dr. Erica Richards. She's the chair and medical director of psychiatry at Sibley Memorial Hospital and an assistant professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Medicine. Dr. Richards, always great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. So let's start on that topic of burnout, as Joe just mentioned. I mean, it's an issue for so many of us, and we understand researchers in Norway are working on identifying a tool to help people at risk before the worst of this happens. So remind us what that looks like. What does burnout look like? What is it like when it's really bad? And what should we think about and keep in mind?
Good morning, Savannah. Good morning, Joe. So burnout, something we all kind of refer to, but do we really know what that means? The study that is out of the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, quite interesting, where they found that about 13% of their workforce essentially at high risk of burnout. And that can mean different things for different people, but in general, we're looking at, do you feel mentally exhausted at work? Do you struggle to really feel enthusiastic about your job? Do you have trouble concentrating when you're at work? And do you overreact? Do you tend to overreact to things throughout the day? The reason that this is different than a bad day. This is different than, oh, I have a deadline and I'm really stressed about it. The reason that this is important is really because it can have long-lasting effects: cardiovascular disease, depression, increased pain symptoms, or even trouble with sleep. And so we encourage people. There's a fun survey on the site that did this study where you can actually look at whether or not you are experiencing burnout. And I think we all will likely score high in some realms of this, but important to know what your limits are and really how to address it if it's there.
I like that you point out the distinction between a bad day and actual burnout.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that's important. Let's talk about cringe-worthy noises. I think most of us have certain noises that make us feel uncomfortable. Maybe it's a knife scraping a plate, chalk on a blackboard. Some people, it's an actual disorder. It's called misophonia. So those who suffer from this experience, talk more about that and how you could control it.
Hi, Joe. Well, misophonia, really, you highlighted the key piece, which is it's a disorder. And putting a name to something, realizing that you're not alone, realizing that other people experience this, really gives you some leeway to seek help, to talk about it. And the way that many people will describe this is it's a sound that drives me crazy. And that sound can be different for different people, but it can lead to anger, it can lead to annoyance, panic, really the need to flee a situation. And, a lot of times at Johns Hopkins Medicine, in our Department of Psychiatry, we talk about, why does this matter? Well, it really starts to matter if it's affecting your daily activities, if it's limiting what you can do. Can you not go to outings? Can you not go to functions? Can you not go to work meetings where they're eating, for example, if that's one of the sounds that disturbs you? And so identifying if it's affecting your life really gives you some information about then how to address it. Obviously, there's therapy, there's things that you can talk about what to do if you're in these situations and really can't exit or get out of it. So all of those things are important, but first realizing that you can talk to somebody about it.
What's your sound?
I think that plate one was what sent me when you just said it. It gave me a shiver. What about you?
Loud revving of a motorcycle. Can't take it. No.
Oh, I like that sound. That's so funny.
Nope.
Finally, let's talk about the other one we mentioned at the top of this: loneliness, friendship. It seems, according to studies, loneliness is on the rise. And we know actually there are big health risks attached to this. We've got one expert, though, arguing that making just one meaningful friend this year could make a big improvement. Tell us about this. Why is it, and what exactly does that mean, meaningful?
So, Savannah, this is a landmark study out of Harvard, and they studied adult development. And what we found is that exactly the point that you made. Making close relationships really matters for someone's well-being. Now, we don't mean it's the number of friends. It's not about just collecting friends and having, for lack of a better term, these superficial relationships on the surface. We really want you to have meaningful relationships. And the way to address this is really to go into saying, I am going to make one extended, meaningful relationship this year. Now, How can you do that? There's several ways to do that. Number one, you can get back in touch with people you may have fallen out of touch with over the years because you're busy. I mean, this is a real push to get caregivers for the young, for the old, to take time out of that caregiving lifestyle to really focus on their needs. And that's one of the things. Who have you lost touch with? Get a specific request to connect. Don't just say, oh, yeah, let's catch up. Let's catch up later. Let's catch up soon. Say, hey, are you free for coffee? Are you free to go to this function with me? Another good piece of advice was really, if you're buying tickets to something, buy an extra ticket. That really forces your hand to go out and ask somebody else to help and to come out with you a little bit. And so all of these things really necessary, but the most important is because it is important for everyone's well-being to make these connections.
What great, easy little tips, because sometimes it's scary, you know, to try to reach out to somebody new. Dr. Erica Richards, thank you so much. Always great to have you.
Thank you.
Turns out even the tooth fairy is not immune to high inflation rates.
When we come back, we'll talk about why some kids are finding way more than just $1 or a quarter under their pillows these days when they lose a tooth. This is Morning News Now.
We're back with financial headlines, starting with a deal that'll merge two of the largest credit card companies in the U.S.
NBC's Silvana Hanau is with us this morning with that and other money news. Hey, Silvana.
To you. Yeah, so Capital One is buying Discover for $35 billion in a deal combining two of the nation's biggest lenders and credit card companies. Capital One is making a big bet as consumers move from paying with cash to cards, and it's thanks to generous rewards programs and, of course, the shift to digital commerce. Capital One uses Visa and MasterCard for most of its cards, but will switch some to the Discover network. The Biden administration is giving semiconductor maker GlobalFoundries $1.5 billion in grants to build and expand factories in upstate New York and Vermont. Now, it is the first major award from the government's program to boost domestic chip production. Intel, Taiwan Semi, Samsung, and Micron have also submitted applications. The grant is part of the $53 billion CHIPS Act, which was passed after the U.S. share of global chip production fell to about 12% in 2020 from 37% in 1990. And Apple Music is testing a feature that lets you easily import playlists from Spotify and other services. 9to5Mac reports Apple is using Songship. That's actually a third-party app that's been available for years, which allows users to move their libraries and playlists between different streaming services. Apple Music's integration with Songshift is only currently showing up for some people using the app on Android devices, and it's not yet fully functional, guys. I don't have to worry about it. I've always used Apple Music, so.
See, I'm the same way. I don't have a Spotify list, so, but it's going to help some folks. All right, Silvana, thank you.
Thank you. All right, when you're a kid, the tooth fairy is a big deal, right? We all know how it works. You lose a baby tooth, you put it under your pillow, and then you wake up the next day to a little gift from the tooth fairy.
But these days, just like everything else, inflation may be causing the tooth trade-in value to rise. That's right. Tooth fairies are leaving larger payouts like, and I can't believe this, $100 for just one tooth. Some kids are even receiving luxury gifts, I guess, that fit under the pillow. For more on this, we are joined by Bea Moyes. She's an author, board-certified cognitive specialist, and parenting coach. Bea, good to have you with us. So the Wall Street Journal highlighted different households the kids got from, and the gifts the kids got from the tooth fairy. So besides money, some kids are getting gifts, expensive jewelry. I mean, like a gold tooth, that might make some sense. I don't know about anything else. But what is behind this trend of just extra generous gifting?
I think parents just want to do more for their children. I think we're just living in a generation and a time where we want to do more and give more than what we have. We want to give our children a better outcome and different outcomes to life. And we just believe that by gifting them, I guess, more exquisite and fancy gifts, you know, from the tooth fairy is just another way of giving your child more than what you may or may have not had.
So according to a 2023 poll, this is from Delta Dental, the average value of a single lost tooth was $6.23. So that's a 16% increase from the year before, and the highest in the 25-year history of this poll. But not every parent, right, is comfortable with this or is going to this extreme. What kind of challenge does it create for parents and kids if some tooth fairies, right, in some homes are willing to pay more for a tooth than in other houses?
I think it creates another sense of unfairness and unbalance. And between, childhood is not about a competition. This is another form of children competing. And of course, parents feeling like their love may not be enough in comparison to what another family can do or is doing or is able to do. So it's just creating another form of, a gap where, some children are receiving fancy gifts while others are still receiving a quarter. And that may have a child question, well, what's going on? Why did you get, a nice purse or something, I don't know, and I'm just getting a quarter. So, it may make parents feel inadequate and not worthy enough, and that's not the case.
So what's your advice to parents who are feeling that because maybe they just can't spend as much as the neighbor kids, but they don't want their kids to feel bad?
Well, childhood is about being magical and wonderful, and developmentally speaking, if you're present and you're there and you're giving your child the time, they will feel like they are enough. But just when they get older, you may want to have that conversation with them about how some families just get different things. And the tooth fairy apparently just make different trips, and just try to explain the best that you can to each parent, to each child, that sometimes it's enough and other times it's not enough, but sometimes you're doing the best that you can anyway.
I like that. Childhood is supposed to be magical. All right, B. Moyes, thank you so much for joining us. Good conversation. We appreciate your time.
Coming up, a celebration of Black art not far from where it was created a century ago.
We're going to take you to the Met for a sneak peek at a new exhibit paying tribute to the Harlem Renaissance. You're watching Morning News now.
Don't just sit there. Buy tickets or something.
Sound familiar? Well, as Stanley Tucci's character famously said, gird your loins, because Runway magazine, well, there's a new editor in town. The Devil Wears Prada is strutting from the big screen to the stage for a musical adaptation in London, and producers have revealed Vanessa Williams will star as the iconic editor-in-chief Miranda Priestley. That is a perfect choice. The unforgettable character was originally made famous by Meryl Streep nearly 2 decades ago. I had to double-check that. It's been 18 years. Stage version based on both the movie and the book first launched in Chicago back in 2022. The show now taking on London's West End, featuring music from none other than Elton John. Performances begin in October, and as Priestley herself would say, that's all.
I love that movie. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Is that one you'd be interested in seeing?
I'm definitely interested in seeing it. It's been a process to get that one to Broadway, so we'll see what happens in London and gets it there. But Vanessa Williams, that's an awesome choice.
And music by Elton John. That's
Yeah.
amazing. All right, thanks, Joe.
Yep.
Well, finally this hour, the Metropolitan Museum of Art is celebrating a culture boom that started right here in New York nearly a century ago. We are talking about the Harlem Renaissance. Today's show's Al Roker got an early look at the exhibit.
A few miles from its namesake neighborhood, New York City's first showcase in 40 years of the Black artistic expression that flourished between the 1920s and 1940s.
It was written out of history, and I think our goal now is to write it back into history.
Denise Morel is the curator of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's newest exhibition, The Harlem Renaissance and Transatlantic Modernism. 12 galleries of portraits, photographs, paintings, and sculptures portraying scenes of activism and everyday life. Wow. All that history in one.
Astounding and really, really moving.
An exploration of how the Great Migration and exodus of African Americans from the segregated South to cities in the North, like New York and Chicago, led to an explosion of creativity in art, literature, and music.
You had a fully developed Black community involved in all aspects of social life in a way that just would not have been possible in a situation where, due to legal segregation, there couldn't even be public gatherings beyond a certain point.
Morel's multi-year treasure hunt, often outside traditional art museums, brought some of the 160 artworks here. Many culled from the collections of historically Black colleges and universities, like Archibald Motley's Lady in Blue.
Just a sense of economic, cultural, and social self-determination, self-expression. That is part of what the Harlem Renaissance was about.
One highlight, Aaron Douglas's mural.
We see workers in the field. Some are jubilant. We have musicians and dancers celebrating, but the future is foretold as well. We see the Union troops retreating.
This is one of almost a dozen pieces on loan from Harlem's Schomburg Center.
These artworks sit at the nexus of Black people recreating themselves.
Art that tells a story, a statement of newfound freedom.
This is a legacy that I hope generations of today will be inspired by.
A restoration of history, bringing it back to the center of American art. Al Roker, NBC News, New York.
Can't wait to check that one out. All right, that's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Stay with us. The news continues right now. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this Tuesday. I'm Savannah Sellers.
I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, no end in sight for an already waterlogged California. Relentless rains flooding major roads across the state, causing headaches for many commuters. Dangerous mudslides, even tornado warnings plaguing Californians exhausted by weeks of wet and wild weather. We're going to bring you the latest from the ground and your full forecast in just a moment. The battle for South Carolina is heating up this morning. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley aiming to take down former President Trump on her home turf. So with only 4 days until the state's critical primary, how can she bounce back from some pretty dismal polling numbers? And will Mr. Trump's controversial take on the death of Alexei Navalny have any impact? Plus, it could be a food allergy game changer. We've got more on a newly greenlit drug that could provide relief to millions of Americans and the potential side effects that may come along with it. And with the Super Bowl now behind us, baseball's first pitch is a few weeks away, but controversy is already brewing on the field. Not over that pitch clock, not over new rules, but over the jerseys. We're going to explain later in the hour.
Yeah, you might have already seen some of this on social media.
Yeah,
It's
there's
really
some interesting
steam.
comments and quotes coming from the players, so we'll delve into some of those. We're going to begin, of course, with the latest in a series of wet winter storms barreling through California overnight.
Many residents are dealing with floods, mudslides, even tornado warnings from this latest round of severe weather. It's causing more problems for a state that's already seen excessive amounts of rain in the past few weeks. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz is in Los Angeles with the latest.
Hey there, good morning to you. It continues to rain down on us here in LA. For perspective, Los Angeles has gotten 75% of its average annual rainfall just this month in February. The month isn't even over yet, and it's leading to major infrastructure issues across the state. I'm in the Hollywood Hills right now, right outside the famous Mulholland Drive, which is now closed, part of it closed indefinitely because of a landslide.
Another blast of wet winter weather threatening California homes, roads, and lives. The storm sending torrents of water and mud rushing down hillsides and closing major thoroughfares across the state.
What's been the impact of storm after storm after storm the past few weeks?
What we're seeing is that the ground is saturated. There's a lot of water coming off the hillside and the watershed areas.
Officials say many drivers underestimate the force of moving water, leading to trapped and submerged vehicles near Sacramento and in Santa Barbara County, where the local airport was closed from flooding. The picturesque Refugio State Park also now closed to the public after these once majestic palm trees came crashing down.
The soil is so saturated, officials say many of these trees are now at risk of collapsing. Like these, 100-year-old trees just uprooted, collapsed into the ocean.
In Sonoma County, vineyards and roadways flooded as the atmospheric river continues to wreak havoc across the state. In Los Angeles, hit hard by mudslides just 2 weeks ago, residents fear the worst.
Every single night I wake up wondering, is the mud going to come down again into the house again?
The historic Wayfarers Chapel in Palos Verdes closed indefinitely due to extensive land movement. And part of the famed Mulholland Drive still closed from a landslide at risk of falling. While in Orange County, officials are continuing to monitor these multi-million-dollar cliffside homes, with more rain still on the horizon.
And you saw those pictures from overhead of the landslide here at Mulholland Drive. It's just indicative of how powerful these back-to-back storms have been in California. And even as the conditions start to ease up, the worst of this storm passes through, officials are still warning about the risks of more landslides and more mudslides in the coming days. Back to you.
All right, Liz, stay safe. Thank you. Now for more on your morning news now weather.
Let's bring in meteorologist Angie Lastman with the forecast. Angie, good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. More rain on the way, as Liz mentioned, and it's going to be, again, the same kind of story of those threats that are going to impact folks across California through the later parts of even today and potentially into tomorrow. Here's the current setup. We've got heavy rain working in for the early morning hours, specifically for Los Angeles. This is going to be one of the spots that we really keep a close eye on through the day today for some flood concerns. We've seen significant rainfall, and we've got the flood watches up and down the coast. We've got 35 million people currently included in this flood watch from Northern California all the way down to Southern California, from San Diego to San Francisco and points north. We have the potential to see some flooding. There's a specific area of Southern California, though, that's giving us a little bit more of a concern here as we go through the day today. This is the spot, Los Angeles to Temecula, where we'll see a better chance for us to see some of that flash flooding. We could see anywhere from an inch or so rainfall rates per hour. We've already got some really saturated grounds. We've got additional rain on the way in kind of two different batches today. So there's a big push of moisture for the early parts of your day, the morning hours out west. We'll see kind of a lull into the afternoon hours and then another push of moisture as we get into the evening hours tonight and beyond. So the rain is still going to be a threat across the state through the day today. Tomorrow we switch gears to more of a snow kind of issue when it comes to driving in those mountainous regions, places like the Great Basin, the Rockies could pick up some heavy snow, but we'll see the rainfall amounts become a little less, and we'll switch gears to more of kind of scattered showers across California for tomorrow. But in the meantime, we could potentially pick up a couple more inches. Places like Los Angeles, about just 2 inches shy of the wettest February on record. Could they break that over the next day or so? Potentially. We've got the chance for another inch to 3 inches across that region. Santa Barbara could pick up another ½ an inch to an inch. San Diego, similar kind of range. So the flooding concerns are going to be there with the washed out roads as well. Travel will be a little difficult in some of the mountainous regions, the Sierra Range across parts of the Rockies as well. You could see maybe a foot to a foot and a half for folks in that area. Meanwhile, well, that's good news. We saw those freeze alerts expire, but the middle of the country now dealing with some really warm temperatures, guys. We've got Dallas heading to 77 today, running 20 degrees above normal in Chicago as well.
All right. Spring early there.
Spring has sprung there. Hey, thanks, Angie. Well, the South Carolina Republican primary is now just 4 days away, and former President Donald Trump holds a commanding lead over former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley in her home state. This doesn't stop Haley from sharpening her attacks, seizing on Trump's first public comments on the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, including his failure to denounce Russian President Vladimir Putin. NBC's Garrett Hake is in Washington with the latest on this for us. Garrett, good morning.
Hey, Savannah, good morning. And yeah, time is really running short now before voters in her home state weigh in. And Nikki Haley is blasting her former boss on Russia, saying he's weak in the knees when it comes to Vladimir Putin. Now, all she tries to make the case that Donald Trump cannot win a general election rematch with President Biden. With 4 days to go until the South Carolina GOP primary, Nikki Haley's fighting an uphill battle against former President Trump on her home turf, arguing Republicans will be doomed in November if they hand Mr. Trump the party's nomination.
Donald Trump can't win. Everything he touches, we lose. How many more times do we have to lose before we say maybe he's the problem?
Haley is seizing on Mr. Trump's first public comments about the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny.
I don't know why he keeps getting weak in the knees when it comes to Russia.
With the former president on his social media site comparing Navalny's sudden death to his own legal problems, and making no mention of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who Western leaders are widely blaming for Navalny's death in Russian custody. Also in the spotlight, Mr. Trump's recent remarks that he would encourage Russia to attack NATO allies unwilling to meet defense spending goals.
I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
Haley slamming those comments.
He sided with a dictator who kills his political opponents.
Echoed by President Biden's campaign in a new digital ad.
Every president since Truman has been a rock-solid supporter of NATO.
except for Donald Trump.
Targeting some 900,000 Michigan voters with roots in NATO border states. Voters like Andy Ledeck, a U.S. Army veteran who immigrated from Poland as a child and finds Mr. Trump's NATO remarks disqualifying.
I was appalled. For someone like a former president of the United States to say something like that is beyond the pale.
Now, all the action in the GOP primary today will be in South Carolina, where former President Trump holds a fundraiser and a town hall this evening. And Haley is giving what her campaign is billing as a major speech on the state of the race. That speech coming as polls show her trailing Trump badly there ahead of Saturday's primary. Savannah?
All right, Garrett Haig, thank you very much.
President Biden is kicking off a fundraising swing on the West Coast today. It comes after his campaign just released fundraising numbers for January. The president raised a total of $42 million, which his campaign says is the best grassroots fundraising month since the start of the campaign. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander joins us now with more on this. So, Peter, what's behind these numbers? Are they in response to Trump's primary wins or his legal challenges?
Yeah, Joe, it's a good question. So that $42 million is the number, as you noted, that was raised by the president's campaign, the DNC, and other supportive groups in the month of January. That means at the end of the month, according to the Biden-Harris campaign, they now have about $130 million of cash on hand. That's a significant toll, and it is really a big advantage over the former President Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner's numbers right now. Of course, he's had to vie for the nomination with other Republicans. Right now, it's neck and neck, or not neck and neck, head to head between him and Nikki Haley, which is costing him money. But it's not just that that's costing him money. It's also the legal bills. You'll remember the Trump campaign last year spent about $42 million? Let me make sure I get it right. $50 million on legal bills, which is significant right now. And the Biden campaign is saying it's really seen a benefit as they try to demonstrate that contrast with the former president, specifically in the days after the Iowa Republican caucus. There were at least 3 consecutive days where the Biden-Harris campaign took in $1 million in those small donations from individual donors, the type of individual grassroots efforts the campaigns really try to focus on.
So, Peter, just how worried are the president's supporters about his low poll numbers, the low approval ratings, and do they look at these numbers, these fundraising numbers, do they offer some encouragement?
I think average Americans don't really look at fundraising numbers and take much away from it, but it does demonstrate in the eyes of a campaign enthusiasm and an ability to sort of bring people on board right now. The Biden campaign is already going up with some digital ads in some key states. You just played Garrett's piece, showed one of those digital ads that's targeting Donald Trump's comments about NATO right now. The Biden campaign focusing on states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, key battlegrounds that they're going to be eyeing in the course of the several months ahead. But at the end of the day, the campaign, the White House recognizes that as this campaign season heats up yet further, they only have so many opportunities to really sort of reset the race, to refocus the conversation. They hope to do that early next month in March with the State of the Union, where the president has a national audience where tens of millions of people tune in. They recognize that there's a real need to use that as a key moment in this campaign season.
And as we mentioned, the president's set to travel to the West Coast for fundraising events. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, you're right. He's going to be going to Los Angeles, heads to the Bay Area as well. This is an effort really to try to ramp up that fundraising toll. But also, I think it comes as part of a wider effort right now we've been seeing really from the White House in general to put the president out there more following the special counsel Robert Hur's findings that were deeply critical in personal terms that really infuriated the White House about the president's age and his memory. The White House recognizing putting President Biden out there with interactions with individuals on a near regular basis is really the best way to try to counter those arguments from some of the president's critics.
All right, Peter Alexander at the White House. Peter, thank you.
Well, the wife of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is vowing to continue his work after he died last week in a remote penal colony. It comes as she and other Navalny allies work to establish the circumstances surrounding his death. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel has more from eastern Ukraine.
President Putin's spokesman is responding directly to the widow of Alexei Navalny, specifically her claims that her late husband was assassinated by the Kremlin. Putin's spokesman called that accusation both unfounded and, quote, obnoxious.
Accusations are growing this morning about the death in prison last week of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. President Biden has said President Putin is responsible for Navalny's death and says the U.S. may impose more penalties on Russia.
We're considering additional sanctions, yes.
Navalny's widow, Yulia, accused Russian officials of keeping his body and preventing his mother from seeing it to give time for traces of poison to disappear, adding, "We will find out how exactly this crime was carried out." Navalny's allies in the Russian opposition, working to uncover more, are already releasing their own narrative about Russia's actions. A human rights group says Russian intelligence officers visited the prison 2 days before Navalny's death to disconnect cameras and listening devices, and that a medical examiner was instructed to list bruises on Navalny's body as coming after death. The Russian opposition newspaper Novaya Gazeta Europe reports that prisoners were locked in their cells the night before Navalny died, followed by a surprise inspection the next morning. NBC News cannot confirm those allegations, which were attributed to anonymous sources. Across the border, Ukraine's President Zelensky visited the front line and urgently called for more weapons to stop Russia's advance in eastern Ukraine. Much of the east now looks right out of World War II, with Ukrainian villages smashed by Russian artillery and largely abandoned, except for military vehicles and troops. At one of the only schools we found still operating, 10-year-old Daria told us she's hearing more explosions now than before.
Are the Russians getting closer?
When I go outside, I hear the explosions are coming closer. So it means they are coming closer and closer, she says.
And the bombs are getting closer. And here in eastern Ukraine, Russian troops are making advances. This is no longer theoretical. Ukrainian field commanders say they need weapons, they need money, they need support, they need ammunition, and they need it now, or they're going to lose more territory.
All right, Richard, thank you so much.
We've got more to come on this hour of Morning News Now, including why WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is back in a London courtroom this morning.
First, though, after the break, the 25-year-old student who's been taken into custody over that double murder on a University of Colorado campus over the weekend. Those stories and more up next.
We're back now with the latest on that fatal dorm room shooting at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs last week.
Police have arrested 25-year-old Nicholas Jordan as a suspect in the shooting, and they're now turning their attention to a motive for the killings. NBC News correspondent Emily Ikeda has the latest.
Colorado Springs has been on edge for days after an unsolved double murder at the University of Colorado's campus there.
We don't know anything, so it's just like I personally don't feel safe with so little information.
But this morning, police say they have a suspect behind bars. The accused killer, 25-year-old Nicholas Jordan, facing 2 counts of first-degree murder. Investigators took the Detroit native into custody Monday morning, just a few miles from the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, where authorities say he was not only a student, but the roommate of one of the victims.
Was there any concern that he might try to flee the area?
Absolutely. We weren't certain exactly where he was at, so we spent a lot of time. We had teams out constantly scouring.
Police say they've been searching for Jordan since Friday, when gunfire erupted in a dorm room, sending the campus into lockdown.
UCCS Alpine Village for gunshot victims.
Those victims, 24-year-old Samuel Knopp, a senior at the school, and 26-year-old Celie Montgomery, who did not attend UCCS. While police are still trying to determine a motive, they believe the shooting was an isolated incident between individuals who were known to one another and not a random attack.
I don't think anyone could ever imagine something like this happening, you know.
Senior Hayden Gillespie will no longer graduate alongside his best friend Sam Knopp, who had a passion for music.
He was probably the most talented guitarist I've ever met, and the talent that was definitely taken from us too soon.
Now, as students remember the lives lost, university officials say they're hopeful this tight-knit college community will lean on each other.
Healing will take time. Rebuilding the trust and safety of our campus will take time. But we are in this together.
And our thanks to Emily Ikeda for that report.
This morning, a high court in London is hearing an appeal by WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to halt his extradition to the United States. The two-day hearing could be the last chance for Assange to stop his transfer to the U.S., where he is wanted on multiple spy charges for leaking secret military files back in 2010 and 2011. Assange and his supporters deny the charges and say the case is politically motivated. NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons joins us now from outside the High Court in London. Keir, good morning. So first, I just did a little bit of this, but get us up to speed on how we got to this point and what's at stake today.
Well, I mean, the people here that you can see outside the historic High Court here in London think that what is at stake is quite simply freedom of speech. You can see there are hundreds of protesters here holding up banners saying free Julian Assange. Inside court, we've heard incredible claims of an alleged CIA plot targeting Julian Assange, and his legal team arguing that what he was doing was pursuing journalism, and as you mentioned, that this would be a politically motivated extradition. You can hear there are speeches now because the court has just finished for lunch, and people are listening and cheering. Inside court, Julian Assange wasn't there. His team say that he was too sick to attend. As you mentioned, though, an extraordinary story that began with the release of that confidential information that changed many people's views of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Then those 7 years holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy, and then almost 5 years in a high-security prison here in London where he has been fighting extradition. In that time, he has had 2 children and got married. The US today, and they will give more evidence tomorrow, are arguing that he should be extradited because they say it's not responsible journalism. They say that he risked lives, and they say that he got involved in illegal hacking.
Keir, what are the main arguments being made by Assange's team in the courtroom this morning? And tell us the latest in terms of just what we've actually heard in there.
Free Julian Assange. Yeah, well, again, you can hear a lot of the action is outside now. But inside court, as you mentioned, what they've been trying to do is argue that an appeal case should be heard. So it's not the appeal itself. There's 2 days of argument simply to see whether or not it's justified that there should be more legal argument. The US government will make its arguments tomorrow. If they lose this case, then it is near to the end of the road for Julian Assange. There are some other legal avenues that he could take, but we could be close to the potential extradition to the US. If he wins, then there will be more court hearings. His wife, who is here and is about to give a speech, says that he is so sick that if he is extradited to the US, he will die in prison. But that kind of humanitarian argument, if you like, is not the legal argument that's taking place inside the court. That is all about whether or not it is a politically motivated attempt to move him to the US. That's the argument that his team is making. That's this morning why they are saying that it's not justified to extradite him from here in the UK.
Keir, we appreciate you competing with that microphone outside. Just one last quick question for you before I let you go. Just possible outcomes and potential next steps here. Obviously, there's the potential of extradition to the U.S., but what are the different routes?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think really this is, as I outlined, I mean, this has been an extraordinary, long-running story where he has got supporters who are absolutely loyal to him and have been supporting him all these years. But we are coming to the final chapter of this, honestly. And in the end, in the months ahead, we are going to see one of 2 things. Either he is going to be extradited to the US, and that will be, the end of this extraordinary story, or he will win and walk out of prison. And again, that will be, those will be images seen around the world.
All right, Keir Simmons, thank you very much.
To get some more international headlines now, new this morning, a Russian court just rejected an appeal filed by the lawyer of detained American journalist Evan Gershkovich.
Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome with that and more. Hey, Claudio.
Good morning, guys. Well, that's right. According to RIA Novosti, a Russian state media outlet, a court in Moscow, as you mentioned, has ruled that Evan Gershkovich should remain in custody. Now, according to that news report, the Moscow City Court rejected the appeal by Gershkovich against the decision of another court to extend the period of detention. As a consequence, Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter, will remain in custody at least until March the 30th. Let's now go to Haiti, where the former First Lady, an ex-prime minister, and the former chief of police are among dozens of suspects indicted for the assassination of former President Jovenel Moïse in 2021. The former chief of Haiti's national police, Leon Charles, faces the most serious charges, including murder and conspiracy against the state. The president's widow, Martine Moïse, and former Prime Minister Claude Joseph are accused of complicity and criminal association. Their names appear in a long list of suspects in a 122-page report issued by the fifth judge to lead the investigation after previous ones stepped down, mainly for fear of being killed. And let's end this tour of the world in space, where on Wednesday, a satellite is expected to make an uncontrolled return through Earth's atmosphere. Now, the European Space Agency said it cannot predict exactly when and where the satellite, called ERS-2, will enter the Earth's atmosphere because its batteries were depleted and its communication electronics were switched off, which means there's no way to actively control or guide the satellite. But don't worry, the space agency reassures that most of the satellites burns up as they re-enter the atmosphere, and fragments usually fall into the ocean. It also said the annual risk of a person being injured by space debris is under 1 in 100 billion. But just to be sure, tomorrow, just keep an eye on the sky. Back to you guys.
Gonna have a giant trampoline ready just in case. Catch it, bounced. All right, Claudio, thank you.
Thank you. Coming up, a new drug that could revolutionize the way doctors treat some food allergies.
After the break, the relief it could provide to millions of Americans and what you should know about any potential side effects. Stay with us. That's next. We're back now with a potential game changer for millions of Americans dealing with certain life-threatening food allergies.
The FDA has approved a drug that's used to treat asthma, now to help people reduce their allergic reactions to foods like peanut, eggs, and wheat. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar is here on set with us to tell us more. Hi, doctor. Good to see you. So, I mean, those are allergies where if you've got them, your reaction can be super serious, right? So what is this drug, and how does it work for both asthma as well as food allergies?
Yeah, I love this when a drug that is used for one condition gets repurposed and studied for another condition, and that's exactly what they did. So this is a medicine that's been around for about 20 years, and it treats different kinds of allergies like allergic asthma and hives and things like that. The way it works is that it's something called a monoclonal antibody, and it binds this molecule that's called IgE. And IgE is really, really important because it triggers allergic reactions. And so if you basically lower the amount of IgE in your body, which is how the medicine works, then if you come into contact with something that you're allergic to, you're not likely to mount a severe allergic reaction. And that's exactly what they found. And the thing that I love the most about it is that it's not specific to peanut or to wheat or to milk. It's just your immune system generally that's kind of being tamped down. And so the people who were involved in this study had a peanut allergy plus at least 2 other food allergies. And they found that after they were given this treatment, it's an injection under the skin every 2 to 4 weeks, that after about 4 months, they were much less likely to have a moderate or severe reaction. And for the people who were had a peanut allergy, they were able to tolerate the equivalent of 2.5 peanuts, which is like unheard of in the peanut allergy world.
So this wouldn't totally eliminate food allergies.
And that's the important thing, Joe. It doesn't. About 17% of people in the trial had no change in their tolerance whatsoever. So it's not a guarantee. So it doesn't mean that you can suddenly start eating peanut butter, and it doesn't mean that you don't have your EpiPen around, because it's not a treatment for anaphylaxis. It's basically something that you would maybe have to take indefinitely. But if you're someone, especially a parent who has kids with multiple food allergies, definitely something you want to consider so you can send them to school and camp and parties without that terrifying fear.
And side effects too, right?
So side effects, of course, it is an injection, so injection site reactions, fever, joint pain, rash, and anaphylaxis. It has what's called a black box warning that it can actually trigger a severe allergic reaction because it's a drug like any other. So the first couple of injections would be given in a doctor's office, so you can be like much how we did the vaccines. Remember, we had to stay 30 minutes, similar to that. But otherwise, pretty well tolerated. Again, we like when a drug's been around for a long time, so we kind of like, it's the good or the evil that we know. It's been around for 20 years. Like, people use it a lot.
Black box reaction. I've never heard
Well,
that.
a black box warning. A black box warning is on a lot of drugs. It's just like, this drug can be associated with X, Y, or Z, and in this case, anaphylaxis, because you know, people who have food allergies are at a higher risk for anaphylaxis.
Absolutely.
And so they need to put that on the label.
For anybody at home right now who has these allergies, maybe their kids have these allergies, what do you need to know? Is this something that they could go get right now at their doctor's office? What's it going to cost them? What would you tell them to do?
Great questions. So people, allergists have been using it off-label for a couple of years, so your allergist is going to know about this, and you can absolutely pick up the phone and call them. Sorry, all the allergists out there who are going to get these phone calls. It's super expensive, up to $5,000 a month for adults, $2,900 a month without insurance for kids. But, you know, now that it is approved for this indication, insurance companies will have a lot more. There's going to be a greater likelihood that they will have to cover it, and you'll just be paying a copay or something. So huge news for the food allergy folks out there.
All right, Dr. Azar, thank you.
Thanks. Now to our series Climate Challenge. This morning, we're taking a closer look at how warmer temperatures are now threatening an important winter tradition in one Minnesota community that relies on frozen lakes. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch takes us there.
This sound out here is bad news.
No, it should be more firm.
On Minnesota's frozen Mille Lacs Lake, we measure about 13 inches of ice. In a normal February, there should be more than 2 feet.
And normally you'd have snow on top of it, and it'd be all solid, good, clear ice.
But thanks to an unseasonably warm winter, a lake that should be covered in ice fishing villages is a ghost town.
What has this season been like?
It's been pretty non-existent.
When we visited earlier this month, Linda Eno's Twin Pines Resort should have been buzzing with hundreds of ice fishers. But this year, about the only thing feeling the chill is her business.
My bartender, my cooks, you know, the hours, my waitresses, they are truly the victims of this.
You just don't have as much work for them?
No, I have practically zero work for them.
Beyond slumping sales, late and thin ice can mean more rescues across the country.
I got you. Keep your hands there on your belly.
Even for wildlife.
Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes, and every one of them is supposed to freeze like this in the winter. But the state says that climate change is taking its toll. Over the last 50 years or so, the lake ice season has shrunk by up to 2 weeks.
This season especially bizarre and frustrating for Michael Lenkowski, who's been ice fishing since age 4.
The fish have been biting like crazy, and there's nobody fishing.
He tries to come out every day.
Well, I sit in my house fixing gear and just waiting to come.
He's one of the people not scared away by warm weather.
What does that mean to you?
I'm very thankful for every single person that walks through my door. Very thankful.
As our ever-changing world puts winter fun at risk of literally melting away. Jesse Kirsch, NBC News, Mille Lacs Lake, Minnesota.
On April 8th, parts of the country will get a rare chance to see a solar eclipse. But when people flock from all over the world to get a glimpse of the phenomenon, it can put a strain on small towns. Ron Plants from our affiliate station WGRZ in Buffalo, New York, shows us how one area is preparing.
We and they all know it's coming, with excitement for some about being smack dab in the path of totality. But for the state police and other law enforcement and emergency responders, it's awareness of what could happen.
We're trying to get numbers on an estimation of how many people would be here. Could be 1 million, could be 500,000. We're looking at that. We're getting those numbers from previous eclipses in different areas.
That might be places like Oregon back in August 2017 when they experienced masses of people for an eclipse.
What we've seen in the past at other locations, people pull off in unsafe areas. It could be on the thruway, it could be on a side road, it could be, in an intersection, elongated, looking at this, eclipse. And that's what we want to have not happen. We want to make sure that people are as safe as possible during that 2-hour span of time. But the totality of darkness will be about 4 minutes just after about 3:15. So what we want to make sure is people aren't driving while looking at something like that, pulling off of the road in an unsafe area that could get hit by a car.
Which tragically actually happened in Kentucky in 2017. Of course, just like the Grand Canyon with past eclipses, they know Niagara Falls will be a hot viewing spot with hotel rooms booked up.
It's one of the wonders of the world, and then you add the eclipse on top of it. It is a pretty cool area to be in for this. So all of us together with our meetings and information, we're able to at least compile a somewhat accurate, measure of event.
They'll depend on public messaging to get the message out.
We're working with New York State DOT and Thruway Authority, all those messaging boards, obviously media, social media, and things like that to put that out there. But also you have to look at, the state parks or different venues.
Our thanks to Ron Plants for that report.
Coming up, the brewing beef over new uniforms that's dominating the MLB weeks before the first pitch is even thrown.
After the break, why some players think the new duds are duds. We'll bring you that story next on Morning News Now.
We're back now with financial headlines. Apple is about to get hit with a massive fine over its music streaming business in Europe.
CNBC's Silvana Hanau joins us on that and other money news. Hey, Silvana.
Hey, Savannah. Hey, Joe. Yeah, so European regulators are reportedly set to fine Apple more than $500 million in an antitrust probe of the music streaming business. The Financial Times and Bloomberg say the European Commission found Apple hindered rivals by failing to tell iPhone users there are cheaper alternatives available outside its App Store. The investigation was sparked by a complaint filed by Spotify in 2019. This would be the first major antitrust fine the EU has imposed on Apple, and it's expected to be announced next month. Nintendo will hold its first direct live stream event tomorrow to show off new games for the Switch console this year. The company is saying some of the titles will come from its publishing and development partners, which could mean Microsoft's Xbox. Last week, the head of Xbox confirmed 4 exclusive games will be released for other platforms like the Switch and PlayStation 5. And Starbucks has opened its first cafe designed with disabled customers in mind. The store in Washington, D.C. has lower counters for better wheelchair access and minimum clutter in the front to make it easier to get around. It also has softer lighting to minimize glare and backlighting to help people read menu items and other signs. Starbucks says all new and renovated stores will have the new design features, guys.
That's great to see.
Yeah, very cool.
Thanks, Savannah. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Behind the success of one of America's titans of finance.
After the break, we're going to bring you the fascinating story of J.P. Morgan's right-hand woman and the bond they forged back at the turn of the 20th century. That's next.
We are back with a fascinating discovery that is out of this world, literally. You'll want to grab your shades because astronomers say they found what might be the brightest object in the universe. It's something called a quasar, and it shines 500 trillion times brighter than our sun. It looks like a little dot in pictures, as you're seeing here, but don't let that fool you. The black hole powering this distant quasar is growing so fast that it swallows the equivalent of a sun a day. Don't worry, though, it's about 12 billion light years away and has actually been around since the early days of the universe. A lot of that was over my head, so I'm just going to make a space joke now. Joe, don't read the prompter and tell me why couldn't the star stay focused?
I don't know. Why, Savannah?
It kept spacing out. There you go.
I literally did a third grade project on quasars and have not thought about quasars since then. So
that
it's good.
feels very advanced for third grade, considering I'm in my 30s and have no idea what I just said.
I was a smart third grader, apparently. So, all right. Thank you, Savannah. Yeah. Finally this hour, you've almost certainly heard of the name J.P. Morgan, but you probably haven't heard of the woman responsible for so much of his success. NBC's Laura Jarrett takes a closer look at the trailblazing story of Morgan's inspiring librarian.
Nestled in the middle of Manhattan is a time capsule, part library, part museum, full of treasures amassed by a titan of the finance industry, J.P. Morgan. His unlikely partner in his quest for rare books, Belle DaCosta Green, a woman with a story of her own.
Morgan was known for hiring the best people, regardless of their qualifications, and he must have just known that Belle Green was one of the best people for the job, if not the best person for the job.
Born in 1879 as Belle Marion Greener, she was raised in Washington, D.C. Her father, Richard, was the first black graduate of Harvard. But when Belle was a teenager, her parents separated, leaving her mother to raise Belle and her siblings under a new name and new identity, passing for white instead of living as black.
She still had to, navigate a world that told her she was less than.
Eventually, Belle made her way to Princeton University, working as a librarian when she met a nephew of J.P. Morgan, who put in a good word with his uncle.
Clearly, she made quite an impression with her knowledge, with her personality, with her confidence, and the rest is history.
Morgan quickly recognized her talents, elevating Belle to his chief negotiator at auctions at home and overseas.
Did he like that she was trying to get a deal even though he obviously had no budget?
No, Morgan always wanted a deal.
Her formidable reputation well known to this day, even to her descendants. Her great-grandnephew, Bob Leitner, fondly recalling her nickname, Aunt Bull.
How did she get that nickname?
She was the bull in the room. She did things that women weren't supposed to do because that's who she was.
Outside of the library's walls, Belle was no stiff. A fixture on the New York party circuit, wearing the latest fashions, her hats a standout.
Do you think she was having fun?
Oh, yeah. She was having so much fun. She was working hard at the Morgan and then playing hard, in New York in the evenings.
But all the while keeping a big secret with dangerous consequences, like losing her dream job.
People always have this idea that, well, it was New York City. It wouldn't have been so bad. And it's like, oh, no. Unfortunately, while we might not have had the kind of institutionalized Jim Crow laws that the South had, racism was rampant, segregation was rampant.
As for whether JP knew her true identity, his family says the jury's still out on that. It's something Peter Morgan Penoyer, JP's great-great-grandson, wonders about himself.
The consensus is that he didn't know, but I'm not sure. He may have known.
What gives you pause?
They work so closely together. It seems implausible to me that there's no chance.
Speculation aside, at its core, a bond between two bright minds. One the Morgan hopes to capture as it turns 100 this year. Its curator is now preparing an exhibit in Belle's honor, with highlights including one of her paychecks she signed herself.
You wonder what it would have meant for her at the time.
This is the paycheck she would have brought home. And so her mother got to see that, her children were succeeding in this world, despite everything they had to overcome.
And one of her final purchases for the museum, a letter from abolitionist Frederick Douglass.
The very last paragraph of this letter is Frederick Douglass calling for equality for African Americans to be seen for their full worth and merit.
Yeah, you wonder if she was sending everyone else a message by selecting this at the end.
Exactly.
That message, now the essence of her legacy.
What do you hope people will take away from her story?
That it doesn't matter what gender you are, what race you are. If you're competent and you're a strong enough individual, you can forge ahead and do anything you want and be whoever you want.
Laura Jarrett, NBC News.
Love that story, and I love that there's going to be an exhibit. There's like a long list of exhibits now that we've seen this morning that we need to check out.
We're busy. We're busy now.
Exactly.
No, very cool. I was just going to say, want to go see that. Absolutely. Very cool. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now. Don't go anywhere.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.